Good evening. I'm Joe Nye, Dean of the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and it's my pleasure to welcome here tonight to this forum our Secretary of Commerce, William M. Daley. Secretary Daley was born into Chicago's first family of politics. He is the son and the brother of two of the most famous mayors in the United States. He graduated from John Marshall Law School and began his legal career in Chicago with the firm of Mayer, Brown, and Pratt. He was a longtime Chicago civic and business leader, president of the Amalgamated Bank of Chicago. He is also a political veteran. He had worked in Walter Mondale's presidential campaign, and in 1992 he was the Illinois chairman for the Clinton-Gore campaign. He's well known for those who have watched the detailed politics of Washington for getting the NAFTA treaty passed by the House and Senate, or by the Senate in particular. He was the man in the White House who did all the heavy lifting on this in terms of helping the president get that passed. Last January, after his Senate confirmation as Secretary of Commerce, he took charge of a part of a department which had been slated for deep congressional cutbacks. But he moved very quickly to establish accountability for the department, and in his current position, he helped the president pass the '97 budget deal. He also internationally helped promote an international accord to criminalize bribery, and he's also pressed companies to hire welfare recipients. That bipartisanship and leadership in rebuilding the department has been recognized by both parties, but probably most importantly by the Commerce Committee Chairman, Senator John McCain, who recently had this tribute to Secretary Daley. He said, "I give him very high marks. He's made a real effort to make sure that the integrity of the department is restored." So please join me in welcoming Secretary of Commerce William M. Daley.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you, Dean, for that introduction and for, quite frankly, the help which you gave the President and this administration and the service to our government when you were at the Department of Defense. I appreciate that. I also do appreciate your comments about family members who have been involved in local politics. I also have two other brothers, so I have to always acknowledge them because my brother Rich gets enough attention, to be frank with you. And we have three sisters too, so I better make sure to mention them, or else I'll really be in trouble. So I thank you, and I know Senator Simpson is going to join us shortly, and I just want to, before he walks in, say nice things about him before he's here, because it would be expected that with someone sitting behind you, you have to say something nice. But he really has been a leader in Congress, a man of great character, and somebody who, as you have been fortunate to see, doesn't hesitate to speak his mind, and he hasn't done that just since he's left politics. So I had the pleasure of spending some time with him at lunch today with a number of other individuals from the school, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that he has been such a strong supporter of the Commerce Department and of some of the activities which we have been involved in and which we will speak about this evening, hopefully, and hear from you, your comments. I'm very fortunate in that I do have strong ties and lots of friends, many of whom work with the Commerce Department, work throughout government, who have graduated from Harvard and attended the school, and so I am indeed appreciative. And at this forum, it truly is an honor. A very good friend of mine, Heather Campion, and her husband Chuck, he's always known in that way, was here as director of the forum for quite a while, and she did a spectacular job. I'm only somewhat saddened that I didn't come when she was here, but she never invited me. So, but anyways, no, I do appreciate it. Many of our Department of Commerce people have been graduates of Harvard, so I appreciate that, and the fact that Ron Brown played such an important role at the school, and he was one of my predecessors that I indeed honored to follow in his footsteps. Many of you may not realize that Teddy Roosevelt, after he graduated from Harvard and became president, signed into law the creation of the Commerce Department, at the time known as the Commerce and Labor Department. And so in a strange way, I guess I owe my job to the alumni of Harvard. So the connections, that's enough of the connections that I may have to this great institution. Last week was a extremely historic week in Washington, for this president presented to Congress the first balanced budget in 30 years since I was a sophomore in college, which seems even longer than 30 years, but it's been quite a while, and we are most fortunate, all of us, and especially the young people that are here, that we have gotten to the point where once again the president is putting forward a balanced budget. And we also announced new unemployment numbers. Since this president took office, nearly 15 million new jobs have been created for our fellow citizens. And in the last 3 months, over 1 million jobs. Our unemployment is at a 24-year low. And this has truly become, as we come to the end of this great century, a new economy, one in which technology has become the engine of our growth and will continue to be that. If you think about it, in the mere 5 years that the president has been in office, we've had an explosion of technologies. Just take the internet. 5 years ago, very few Americans really understood or had any knowledge of what the internet could provide for them. And when you look at the people around the world, it was truly an unknown form of communication. But it has moved so rapidly that it affects all of our lives today, and in the business world and in our personal lives, it has become quite a medium for good, and some people would think right now maybe for bad, to be frank with you. But we've had historic progress, and even this evening, this is being covered live on the internet. So I do fully appreciate the changes that are going on, as all of us should. This economy, it is an economy where, in addition to the fact that technology is the engine of growth, training and education is becoming and must become second nature for all of us. And in this new economy, trade, which I want to speak about tonight, truly is our future, in my opinion. When you think about how our economy has grown over the last couple of years, we have become the most competitive economy in the world. And since 1993, our exports have accounted for over a third of the economic growth which we have all enjoyed. Today, 12 million of our fellow citizens owe their jobs to exports. And 2 million jobs have been created in the last 4 years alone, dependent on the growth in our exports. So my message is rather clear and rather simple. In this post-Cold War era, world leadership is really about economic leadership. You cannot be strong, you cannot be the world leader, military, security, whatever, unless you are truly strong economically. One without the other does not make a strong and vibrant nation, and does not make a true leader. For us to continue to be the leader, we must lead in support, in my opinion, of open trade, first. And second, we must make a true commitment to this global economy which we are benefiting from. And third, we have to, and this is extremely important today, build a domestic consensus for open trade. With the help of presidents who were educated at this great institution, we have led in the support of open trade, going back to Franklin Roosevelt, who pursued this path and brought us back from the Smoot-Hawley days and brought us to the Reciprocal Trade Agreement of 1934. After that, President Kennedy told us that this nation must either trade or we will fade. And so he put into motion the GATT round of negotiations, which ended up being completed and being called the Kennedy round. And President Clinton, a mere graduate of Georgetown and spent some time at Yale, has put it very simply in his opinion. Our need is to compete and not to retreat. In the face of very strong opposition, he completed, as has been mentioned, and I was very proud to play a part in it, the NAFTA agreement, which was a difficult fight, but in my opinion, extremely important to us, to America, and to our neighbor to whom we share a 2,000-mile border, and also passed the GATT agreements. In the last 5 years, we have opened new markets through a host of trade agreements, somewhere in excess of 200. We have removed most of the foreign barriers to American goods and products, everything from agriculture to forest products to telecommunications and information technologies, many areas in which we, obviously, are the dominant player. We have much to do as we get to the next great century, but we should also be very proud of how far we've come in a rather short period. We have led in support of trade in many other ways also. This president knows and really understands that not everyone benefits in this new world economy and in further opening of trade, that there are winners and there are some losers in trade. And some people would say, oh, let them fend for themselves, just, the market will take care of them, and this president doesn't agree with that. He has tried to address their concerns and their fears, and whether they have been damaged and lost jobs by technology, which is the predominant way that our economy has changed, quite frankly, whether it's trade or other ways. We've doubled the funds for dislocated workers over the last 5 years. And now we're trying to work in partnership with communities to try to invest several $100 million in this new budget to help people adjust to the dislocations that may arise by these new technologies and also trade agreements. This is really something that was started by President President Kennedy in the early 60s, when he approached Congress to try to reduce trade barriers around the world. He made sure that Congress also addressed ways to help those citizens who would be adversely affected, and that's how the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program came into being. And it is still run by the Labor Department and Commerce Department today. Second, I firmly believe that we have to firmly support and be committed to this new global economy. Some people may look right now at Asia's problems and say, why do we care? Why are we getting involved there? Why would we care about what's going on in Latin America or Eastern Europe right now? And let's just worry about our own problems. Let's kind of hunker down, and we have serious problems in our country, but let's don't worry so much about what's going on in the rest of the world. We can't do that any longer. We are too interdependent, and we are too interconnected in this world. So that's, in my opinion, not an option anymore. We need to tell all of our fellow citizens about the scope of the present Asian financial crisis, and we have to be honest with ourselves. I know many of the people in this room are very familiar and aware of what is going on and the potential consequences that may occur if things get worse. We have to face the fact of growing trade deficits this year, which will present political problems for all of us as we get to the end of this year, which would coincide, obviously, with a midterm congressional election. I'll have the pleasure in a couple of days of going to Japan and Korea and Singapore. And what I intend to do is to re-emphasize the U.S. government's commitment to help these economies be restored to sound footing, because that's good for them and it's good for us. But at the same time, I intend to insist that our workers do not bear the brunt of missed opportunities and poor policies by these governments in Asia. Many of the things that have caused, many of the actions that have caused some of these problems are items that we have, for many years, pointed out to the Asian governments should be corrected. And so we should not be the people who suffer by virtue of some of the policies. Finally, in my opinion, we must be resolved to build this domestic consensus that I talked about for open trade. It's obvious that the important role that trade plays in our successes has not been translated to greater political support for open trade. If you look at the difficulties which we had last fall to pass fast track, they were enormous and, quite frankly, unexpected in many quarters of those of us who believe strongly in open trade and see the benefits. This was the first president in 20 years who's been denied the authority to move forward fast-track authority, which is merely the authority to go and begin serious negotiations to bring down barriers around the world. That's all it was intended to do, and this president was denied that, which really should be a awakening call for all of us who believe that this president should have the authority and the positive things that come out of open trade. This uncertainty that's going on right now and the president not having authority really does complicate us as we try to deal with other governments and other economies to encourage them to continue to open their markets. And the bottom line is denying this president fast-track authority has not created one new job in this country. And it will not create one new job in this country if we continue to give him the authority, again, that every president in 20 years has had. The fact of the matter is, the reason we lost is the people who were opposed to fast track were very clear and very loud in their opposition. And those of us who believe in fast track and believe in open trade were not as vocal and were not as tough, quite frankly, as those who were opposed to it. We sat back thinking this was the right thing to do and everyone will get it. Well, they didn't get it. We did try hard, and the private sector, government, the president, but there was a disconnect. I think amongst the elites, those of us in this room, quite frankly, and we are all elites, you may not believe it, you may not acknowledge it, but the fact that you're sitting here means that we're in a very special category of people in the world to have this opportunity. We understood it, or we thought we understood it, and we just figured everybody else would. But for the first time, this became a outside the Beltway issue. And outside the Beltway, there was no consensus for this. Members of Congress didn't hear from constituents. I could say something, but I won't. They didn't hear from their constituents who were beneficiaries of open trade. I remember, I can't tell you how many Congress people I spoke to, and they said, you know, nobody's come to my office. Nobody's come to my district office and said, I'm a beneficiary of what's going on, or my job is owed to the fact that we're doing more trade. They heard from the people who had a fear, but they really heard from no one. And that was extremely upsetting, very different than when the NAFTA fight occurred, to be frank with you, because they heard all the time, not only from CEOs, but they heard from normal people. We all have to do, those of us who believe, a better job of reaching the American people. We need to challenge those who helped us pass NAFTA, corporate sector and government people, to be out there and be more vocal and to engage people more directly. And we need, quite frankly, the next generation of leaders to be delivering this message at a much younger age if you believe in it. We need to make the public understand that trade creates additional wealth and does raise standards of living. There is a big picture, obviously. It creates wealth not for a very select few of people, but for a very broad cross-section of Americans. We need to take on these critics more forcefully and challenge them without hesitation. And we have to defend what we have accomplished and what we believe is successful. We can't allow critics to take potshots that don't go unanswered. So we'll try to begin this process this evening. I do disagree with the critics and disagree strongly, and many of whom are my own friends and many of whom are in the party in which I'm proud to be a member of. The critics say that trade and the more open trade we do lowers our standard of living and our wages for our fellow citizens. Well, that's simply not true. Export-related jobs pay better, about 15% better, than non-export related jobs. And if you look at family incomes, after staggering for about 20 years, they are beginning to rise. Since 1993, the income of the average American family has increased by about $2,200, even adjusting for inflation. And in fact, the real incomes of every income group of the workforce increased between 93 and 96, with the largest increase for the lowest paid wage earners. Some other critics will point to the trade deficit as the reason to oppose additional expansion of trade. And therefore, we should close our borders to imports. I believe strongly that this is totally ill-founded. but you would be surprised how many people absolutely believe that. The trade deficit as a percentage of our GDP has reduced from 1987 being about 3% to now in 1996 being about 1%. The trade deficit, which will grow this year, is primarily a function of the incredibly healthy and robust economy that we're enjoying. The fact of the matter is, we cannot supply all of the demand that the American consumer and the American economy, being as strong as it is, demands right now. I would doubt that any critics would recommend that we go back to the 1970s when there was a trade surplus, but you had much higher unemployment, spiraling inflation. And what do we have today? In spite of the fact that our trade deficit has grown, we have high growth, job creation, and inflation at about a 32-year low. If we put it another way, how many of us would really want to trade places right now with Korea or Japan, who have trade surpluses? We need, in my opinion, to move off of this fixation with the trade deficit numbers, somehow meaning that if you have, you always have a winner and a loser. If your imports begin to grow, somehow that means there's automatic job loss in our country, and that's just not the fact. Some others will contend that we should only trade with those nations that are basically at the same level of economic development as us, meaning you basically trade with the European Union, Canadians, and maybe the Japanese. They somehow convey the impression that we have something to lose, and we will lose if we trade with developing nations. And that is just not the case. And our wages will somehow go down if we trade with these developing nations. Once again, the facts don't bear that out. If you look at the U.S. economy, we are the strongest, our workers are the best trained, most educated, and most productive. And in the last 10 years, our exports to developing nations have increased 240% over our exports to developed nations. And exports to our low-wage countries now amount to about 42% of all of our exports. Finally, there is a charge that's also made that we are not committed to promoting labor and environmental standards around the world, that we only see things from the bottom line, and that's all we care about. The fact is that this administration, in my opinion, like none other before, has been very aggressive in making the case and addressing labor and environmental issues. And the bottom line also is the fact we have gotten very little help from other countries. Some very developed nations have not given us the assistance in either of those areas. We have successfully pushed to get the environmental issue on the agenda of the World Trade Organization, and we continue to press the inclusion of labor issues and encourage the WTO and the International Labor Organization to work together to address some labor issues. Our trading partners are extremely well aware of the fact that this president has been so committed on both of those issues. And we are committing additional resources to problems such as abusive child labor practices, and we've encouraged and have been successful in bringing in many businesses as a result of the anti-sweatshop initiatives by Congress to address some real concerns that all of us have for some of these activities around the world. But the bottom line is, and the fact of the matter is, if we're honest with ourselves, it's basically us against everybody else on this issue. And when you get to the developing nations, they have a real concern that somehow when we talk about these issues, we're really just trying to raise barriers. Is your electrician union fellow? Yeah. I would assume he is. He's probably a good electrician too, but something that he can't control is going on. They worry that we're just lecturing them all the time and we're haranguing them. And somehow, we raise these issues because we know they can't comply, and therefore this is basically a trade barrier on our part. So there's real suspicion about our motives. But this president, once again, as I say, is extremely committed. We also hear the argument that oftentimes we put intellectual property rights ahead of labor or environmental. The bottom line is it took us years in this country to forge a consensus about intellectual property rights. and how to address that issue by the government addressing it. And so it's going to take us a very long time to pursue those, and then to pursue intellectual property rights, it took us a very long time to pursue them in international foray. So the fact is, to get labor and environment addressed in these foray will be very difficult, and we are doing it, and we're constantly doing it in all ways, shapes, and forms. So I do believe strongly that we are beginning to build a consensus, and as we all know, it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in this country, but we will continue to work and be committed to try to build a consensus in these countries and also in the international organizations that we play such an important role. But nobody should doubt our commitment either on labor or environment, even when we have to do it on our own or where there's substantial political cost to this administration. At the same time, in my opinion, we cannot make trade and the chance to add good jobs and improve the wages of Americans and our standard of living here at home a hostage to other policy concerns, no matter how important we may feel they are. We in the United States have always have had for many, many years a most open trading system, and the rest of the world, most of the rest of the world has not been as open as we have for as long as we have been. In certain areas, we will face growing import competition, regardless of what we do, unless the critics who talk about our policies are willing to be intellectually honest and talk about raising barriers to keep imports out, which nobody wants to be honest and make that case, because it didn't work last time. But if many of the opponents want to be honest with this issue, they should lay on the table how they would and what barriers that they would raise to keep out imports. The right course, in our opinion, is to demand that others continue to open up and to find ways to make their markets more open, which is good for them, and not just good for us, but is good for them, in our opinion, as our market, open for such a long period, has been good, in my opinion, for us. It is in our interest, economically and also strategically, to trade more with these developing countries around the world. It is in our interest to help to make them grow, and at the same time, to encourage them to improve their labor and environmental protections. Turning our backs on these emerging markets will lead us to slower economic growth here at home and will do nothing to improve the wages or conditions in those countries. And this is not what any of us want to do. As our president has said, the people with the biggest stake in this struggle are those who go to work every day at jobs all across America in just about every sector. To you, the students who are in the room, let me just make a comment or two, because I assume and hope that you will, the vast majority of you will go into government, and you will attempt to try to take your knowledge and your experiences that you've gathered here and the rest of your life into government. We sorely need the sort of energy and commitment which you have into government. I would hope that you will come into government. Hopefully, many of you will come to the Commerce Department, and your goal may be to be Secretary of Commerce after 2001, please. So you'll be the people, hopefully, who will be laying out a lot of the policies that will affect your fellow citizens and affect the world into the next century. Those policies that you'll work on will be as important as any of your colleagues in other schools, whether it's business school or law school, or those colleagues of yours who may go into corporation, as important as the products that they may make or the jobs they'll create. You in government will be able to affect your fellow citizens in a way that is quite rewarding. As somebody, to be honest with you, who this is the first time I've been in government. I've been around government and politics for a few years, but this is the first opportunity I've had to come into government. It's not bad to come in as Secretary of Commerce, but it is truly an unbelievably rewarding experience. I've just learned in this last year the sort of things and the sort of attitude that my father and my brother have always exhibited about their service in government, and many other people, and you really don't appreciate it till you get in. It is obviously much more rewarding financially and in other careers. but it is a tremendous opportunity to know that you're trying to take actions that are going to help the citizens that you are honored to serve. So I really encourage you to really get into government quickly and plan on staying a while and trying to affect a better quality of life for all of our citizens. It's been a year, as has been mentioned, since I became secretary, and at my confirmation hearing, one of the senators asked me if I had a problem basically being a salesman for American products and American goods, which has become a role that the Secretary of Commerce plays. I don't, because I think it's important that the U.S. government stand behind companies that are out helping to strengthen our economy and helps strengthening the standard of living. My priorities have been to aggressively promote U.S. products. And in this changing economy, manufacturers who are in Chicago who used to see their competition as Kansas City now see their competition as Taiwan or any other country in Asia, or many countries that were never viewed by a small manufacturer in Chicago as a potential competitor. They understand today, and if they want to succeed, that the real competition is coming from somewhere other than down Route 66. We have become most aggressive, and with the federal government's help, we think we've made a real mark to continue to help our companies and help, therefore, our citizens. And when you look at what's going on with companies in this state, I know there's a number who have been most active in which we have been most actively supporting, and have won contracts in China, or air traffic control system in Mongolia, or water filtration system in India. In my opinion, that's good for the state, it's good for your citizens in the state, and it strengthens the U.S. government. The second priority that we focused on is trying to make sure that all these agreements which we've reached are being complied with. Mickey Cantor, my predecessor, started what's called the Compliance Center, and we're beginning to change that. In addition to being a compliance center, basically a complaint center, especially for small and medium-sized businesses, to get a better understanding of trade agreements and problems that they may encounter, especially right now in Asia. So we're doing a concerted effort to try to have outreach to small and medium-sized businesses who are really the backbone of our economy, and the success of our economy the last number of years has been by virtue of the fact that our small and medium-sized businesses have grown and have been so successful during this period. It's not, the success of our economy is not by virtue of the large companies growing and continuing to grow, but the fact that so many small and medium-sized businesses have been strengthened. We completed last year opening about 100 new export centers around the country to help small and medium-sized businesses understand the opportunities that exist for them. There's about 100,000 small companies that are involved in exporting, and there need to be more. We're only 4% of the world's consumers that live here. 96% of the world's consumers live outside our shores. So it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you're in business, you better be able to sell your product somewhere else other than just here. We obviously can do much more in the government, and that is to make consumers understand the benefits of these new trade agreements and the opportunities that have been created, and lower prices and the better quality that's come by virtue of this open system. And in my opinion, the younger we try to make this case, the better off we'll be long term. The President's Export Council has started a virtual trade mission endeavor in high schools throughout the country, and we've got to expand that into every state so that young people, very young people, understand the importance and get an understanding of how we're all interconnected and interdependent economically. I think that's extremely important, and we at the Commerce Department are trying to take the lead with the private sector to do that. They're obviously explaining the role of trade and exports, and our goal is to have every high school senior have a better understanding of trade, of economics, and the importance that that will play in their lives and their fellow citizens, no matter what career they may go into. And in our opinion, if we start younger, with the younger people, they will obviously end up understanding, we hope, the importance that this will play in their future. Let me just close on this before we get to hopefully the fun of this evening. As we approach this next great century, we must make government and the private sector work together like they never have. Neither one can do it can make our country successful. The debate, I think, of is government the problem or government the solution, hopefully is over. You can look at it either way. It's neither, or it's both, or it's a little of each. But the fact we've gone beyond that, in my opinion, when it comes to trade policy, we've got to take on the critics, as I mentioned, clearly and directly. We need to take on those who wish away this economic interdependence and interconnection that's occurred. We cannot put that genie back in the bottle. It's too late. We need to take on those who think that nothing we do could ever help those who are struggling to make the adjustment to this new economy. We can. There is a lot we can do to help them adjust to this new economy. We must also, and this may be one of the most challenging things we can do, we have to challenge those who have gained so much and have been rewarded so much with this new economy. They need to help us educate and train America's youth. They need to work with us in government to do more to help those who have not shared in the prosperity that many of us have shared in. We've got to widen the winner's circle and bring more people into that. Our success will be measured not by the next degree of economic indicators, no matter how good they've been, but our success will really be judged on whether the American people believe that we in government and those in the private sector and those of us, quite frankly, who are elites, whether we really are acting in their own behalf and on behalf of them, or whether we're just acting on behalf of ourselves. That's the real challenge that we've got, those of us who have benefited by this economic surge of the last number of years. These challenges are extremely substantial, but so are the opportunities when you are the world's economic leader. Thank you very much.
We have microphones on the floor. Unfortunately, because of the power surge, the mics on the balcony are not working. I should say that, Secretary Daley, that when Heather Campion left, people said the forum would never be the same. I didn't mean that the lights would go out. We have time for a number of questions and answers, but obviously the more brief and to the point your question is, the better. So please keep your questions brief and one to a customer. We'll start with this mic.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. My name is Josh Freeman. I'm a joint student here at the Kennedy School and at the Business School. And the question I have is, one of the biggest trade issues or questions in front of the United States today, although it's been somewhat overshadowed by the Asian financial crisis, seems to be how we're going to bring China into the World Trade Organization and into the world's trading system. I wonder if you could share your thoughts on the question of the terms and timetable that you see for Chinese accession, and on the question of whether the World Trade Organization can help shape China, or whether China is too big and might undermine the nascent World Trade Organization.
We're involved and have been for a while in some pretty difficult negotiations, to be very blunt with you. The Chinese believe they ought to be brought in and then comply, and our attitude is no. We've got certain commitments that have been. Oh, sorry. We have certain commitments that other countries have agreed to before they've come in, and obviously, if you've not been in this system, you shouldn't necessarily get the benefits immediately without some of the obligations that other nations have met over the years. There is also a growing feeling amongst a lot of people in China and China observers that the importance of the WTO, of entry into the WTO by the Chinese, may not be anywhere near what some of us think it is. We are not going to bend on our need for real commitments that are short-term schedules for the Chinese to come into the WTO, and they are not budging, quite frankly, at all. And therein lies this growing belief that maybe their desire to join is not as strong as some believe. How the Asian situation affects them, whether it pushes them to come in or pushes them away. To be very frank with you, I'm not quite sure which way it will read. And one of the things I want to talk to other people on my visit in Asia is their opinion on what China will do. But we've not seen any movement over the last 6 months, in spite of the President Jiang Zemin's visit in September. It's been a little disappointing.
Hi, Secretary. Secretary Daley, my name is Chris Brown, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I wanted to ask you about recent trends around NAFTA and GATT and trade issues. Hardly a month goes by where we don't hear about manufacturing jobs, high quality, high paying manufacturing jobs moving to Mexico and putting those Americans out of work who are going into the services sector, the service economy, that has seen the majority of the growth of the 15 million new jobs since Clinton took office. I guess my question to you would be, how do you reconcile that vision that we're creating this downsized middle class within our own borders, while companies, are seeing tremendous growth in profits by sending those same jobs abroad or overseas to pay workers dramatically less, and as you mentioned, with a fraction of the labor or environmental protections?
Well, the trend to move jobs out of this country began a long time ago. I think.
But it's sped up since NAFTA and GATT, right?
Well, job loss to Mexico hasn't been in the studies that we talked about in a 3-year review in July of 1997. We estimate, and not the government, but a number of studies, of say somewhere around 180,000 jobs may have been lost by virtue of NAFTA. Now, there are other estimates up to 450,000 job loss. Assume it's somewhere in the middle of those two. This is an economy that churns about 8 million jobs a year. I believe NAFTA has been good for the United States. I think it has been good for Mexico. It is a neighbor that we share a 2,000-mile border. I think it has helped solidify that economy and that government. If it wasn't for NAFTA, that peso devaluation, in my opinion, the immediate or the short-term comeback for that economy would not have occurred. In 1984, the government of Mexico did the exact opposite. They raised barriers. They cut off imports into their country. Pardon me. And we were damaged by that. This government of Mexico stayed with the program that they had agreed to in NAFTA, continued to lower the barriers. Our barriers were down. There was very little prohibition for Mexican goods to come into this country because our tariffs and our barriers were very low. So I do believe strongly that NAFTA has been good for our economy. There's no doubt, as I say, that jobs from different sectors have left this country for a whole host of reasons over the last number of years. I don't think we can necessarily stop that trend when a company needs to go, and a lot of that is by virtue of technology advances in the ability to perform functions around the world. It isn't just low wages that have driven those sort of movements. There's a whole host of reasons. But the fact of the matter is, again, I don't hesitate to defend NAFTA. I think it's been good for the United States. There has been some job loss, but nowhere near the benefits that have come to this country, and especially in trying to help stabilize a neighbor that we share a 2,000-mile border with. Very complex relationship, no doubt about it, and that's why a lot of people got excited about NAFTA. Not anything to do with, I mean, you got to believe there are very few people, including myself, who ever read the entire agreement. So it wasn't about the agreement, a lot of the opposition, as much about a whole host of other things around immigration problems, drug problems, corruption, a lot of things that complicates our relationship with that government or that country.
Secretary Daley, hi. My name is Kishan. I'm graduating from the Kennedy School this year, and I'm actually one of those few who actually read the NAFTA for a trade class, and I hope to go into trade policy one day. My question to you is that we've heard the terms free trade, fair trade, and tonight open trade. And the one that made the most sense to me always was Patrick Buchanan's during his election bid for presidency, that was fair trade, that we should set domestic priorities paramount, not necessarily those corporate ones, but the ones that affect working people the most. And I think it's great that you have this compliance center so that companies will be able to tell you when they see unfair practices. My question is, what are you going to do when they tell you about those unfair practices? What do you say to allegations that the Clinton administration is soft on trade, be it most favored trade, most favored nation status, or that you are that you are more heavy on threats and less on action, that you have more bark than bite in terms of trade enforcement?
Well, I think if you take cases brought to the WTO, we've probably been the most aggressive in cases that have been brought by any nation, and we've been successful in all but one.
The first case you brought to the WTO got shot down, right?
No, the last case, which was the Kodak case, got shot down.
The gasoline case.
Well, my opinion is we have been aggressive. It is difficult, to be frank with you. What we do if a complaint, first of all, the Compliance Center has two functions now. One is which you may be surprised or not surprised, that this will be the first place that all of these agreements are basically housed, and you can go on the internet and get copies of these, which are very difficult to have found before this. There's a whole host of things we will do. We will, if a company comes to us or we determine that an agreement is not being lived up to, obviously we'll approach that government, make the case as to why this agreement's not being followed, and a lot of it is results. We have the ultimate action of taking a 301, which, as you probably know, being a student, is not well liked in other parts of the world, and is something that many countries view as a hammer over their heads. There is a growing resistance to this sort of unilateral action that we take. But it is definitely going to continue to be an arrow in our bag that we may use. We've got to be judicious with it, because what we don't want to do is cause a tremendous backlash by the WTO and other organizations by us using it too much. But I believe we have been strong. I think we've been aggressive. I think we've done a very a concerted effort, not only from the Commerce Department or the Trade Representative, but we brought the Secretary of State in when she meets with people, then she visits and talks about economic situations, and I converse with her rather often before she visits a country, and make sure that she highlights some of the restrictions that may be occurring.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Secretary Daley, welcome to the Kennedy School. My name is Akram Awad. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School, and I'd like to ask you a question about some of the legitimate concerns like labor and the environment that may be holding up the economy and trade in particular. I'm speaking in reference to the Religious Persecution Act of 1997, co-authored by Representative Wolf and Senator Specter. I oppose the legislation, and not only for reasons of hurting the U.S. economy, but also because I think it would hurt the citizens of the countries which are targeted. I'd like to know what what the administration's response is to that legislation, and what we as citizens can do to at least soften the blow if it does pass.
To be very honest, I don't know if we've taken a strong position one way or the other on it yet. We obviously have discussed in my brief tenure as secretary, have discussed, and when I visited different countries, China being one, the need for more opening of religious activities, and that this is a serious issue for us, and we are encouraged, taking China for the moment, with some actions that have occurred. There's going to be a delegation of religious leaders visit China very shortly and be in a dialogue with the government, and have a pretty broad ability to move around the country, which is encouraging. So those are sort of actions that we will continue to try to stress, and to be frank with you, I will get back to you and tell you what, if any, position we've taken on the legislation.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Good evening, Secretary Daley. My name is Byron McLean, and I'm a sophomore at Harvard College, but perhaps even more importantly, an avid Chicago Cubs baseball fan.
Well, let me just tell you the truth. I live on the south side of Chicago. I'm a White Sox fan, okay? I've been to one Cub game in my life, okay? And so, now so I'm glad you're a Cub fan, but
Sorry about that. Well, but anyway, I just wanted to mention that you mentioned during your speech that across all family incomes in America have increased during past years, but also what has been the fact is that income inequality has increased recently as well. And I wanted to hear from you your opinion in how America's open trade policy has contributed to the growing income inequality in America, and also what mechanisms we can use in order to reduce the growing inequality between America's filthy rich and their despairing poor.
well, there's no doubt that there has been a spread and a gap that's grown. And those of us who've been the beneficiaries of this improved economy, not only improved by virtue of trade, but also by the tremendous advantages and improvements in technology over the last number of years, have got to find a way to address the concerns and the needs. And as I made reference in my speech, those of us who've benefited by this have to be more sensitive to the fact that there is a growing number of people who have not. And they must take the steps that we can't have a society that continues to be stretched like this into the next century without undergoing potentially some real serious social problems. So I think all of us, government's got to take steps that they can, the private sector has to first of all acknowledge that this is occurring, and that is a problem that we have to address. Those of us who believe in trade, as I say, have got to get some of the winners to address it. And that's training people, reaching out to people who have been disadvantaged and have not been brought into the mainstream in a more aggressive way, and try to address the concerns and make sure our schools obviously at a high school and junior college level begin to address the needs of this group who are being left behind, and get them better educated to deal with the jobs of the future and better trained, and therefore be able to move into a workforce that is going to be much more technologically advanced than any of those of us who are a little older have had to deal with. So there's no doubt this has gotten everyone's attention, right, in my opinion, and the government are concerned about it. And everyone in society should be concerned about it, especially those of us who've been the beneficiaries of this tremendous economy.
Thank you.
We can take two more
We can go
questions, one from each mic.
Good evening, Mr. Secretary. My name is CJ Mahoney, and I'm a sophomore at the college. You mentioned fast-track authority and differences of opinion within the Democratic Party on that issue. Now, looking towards the 2000 Democratic primary, the prospect of Gephardt versus Gore, to what extent do you believe that that primary will be a referendum on trade policy within the Democratic Party, and which side do you believe is the best position to win?
You mean which side of policy or candidate?
Of the policy, not the candidate.
Oh, okay, good, thanks. Let me just be honest. Gore's going to win, and I'm for the vice president. I think it would be healthy if it's a honest debate, and not only in the Democratic Party, but the Republican Party and the country. I think that would be good. If we can, and this may be a dream, stay away from some of the demagoguery that goes on, it would be helpful. I think we've got to build a consensus. I do believe that the vast majority of Americans don't understand the benefits of open trade and how much this economy and so many of them, their jobs are related to that. Just take in the labor movement. How many of labor's, of the 11% of the workforce that's employed, how much of that, those jobs are owed really to exports. I don't think the people in the workforce understand that clearly. So I think it will be, I don't think it will be the dominant issue, to be frank with you. But I think it will be one of the top 3 or 4 issues that move forward in both primaries. And in the long run, I think that'll be healthy for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Secretary. I'm David Welna. I covered the NAFTA debate and its aftermath in Mexico for National Public Radio, and I'm here this year as a Neiman Fellow. And 2 weeks ago, President Clinton said that he is going to make another stab at trying to get fast track approved, I suppose before he has to go to Chile in April to try to make good on his promise that the U.S. would back up fast track for that country, or free trade for that country. But he faces a situation where there's a Congress in which the Democrats depend on money from labor much more than they did back when NAFTA was approved. And labor is solidly against that. The Midwest, which has benefited greatly from NAFTA, the congressman from that region voted squarely against fast track. What is it going to take to change people's minds, given the situation of the funding for these congressmen?
Well, you've pretty much laid out the problem. If you look at New England, which has been such a beneficiary of export growth and new technologies, and I don't think we had one Democratic congressman or congressperson from all of New England who was going to step forward if there had been an actual vote and vote for fast track, which is rather disappointing. What is going to have to happen is we're going to have to make the case, as I was saying, to the public more and try to counter. There were a number of members who voted for NAFTA, voted for GATT, who took a pass or were going to take a pass on this issue, who I do sincerely believe understand the importance of open trade. It was almost a no-brainer to say you were going to be against fast track. There was no downside to you in your district, none. And somehow we've got to create a downside, and that is people are saying to a congressperson, look, my job is dependent on more markets being open. My job is dependent upon open and freer trade and not beginning to raise the barriers. And that's going to be difficult, but it may be a lot longer term than we had cared to do. A number of the members who voted for NAFTA in 1993 either retired or lost in 94, and they were considered moderates. I think in this short legislative year, I think there's only 66 or 67 legislative days left in this Congress. I think it's probably pretty unlikely that you would see, clearly you can't run up the flagpole the same fast track authority that we talked about in the fall and think that somehow we're going to crawl our way to the extra 10 votes, because it's not going to happen. And I don't think that necessarily is good, because we're not building that consensus that has to be built for long-term purposes for trade. To some degree, we are the victims of our own successes. In 93, when we did NAFTA, the economy was not as strong. The president made the case to, we've got to take some bold actions. We had the budget bill and a tax increase in August, which was a tremendous, August of 93, a difficult fight. But that, along with, quite honestly, the 91 tax increase that George Bush paid for, which began to a large degree this process, and then, in my opinion, a strong statement in 93, very, very strong statement, got us on the road to the ability of the president to propose a balanced budget. My sense is that it will be very difficult to do this year, if not impossible, and we clearly could not do it, as I say, by running up the same flag up the pole. Which is unfortunate, because I think the president ought to have a broad authority. Remember, these agreements have to come back to Congress, and they do have a vote. And never again will a trade agreement come before Congress and get rubber stamped. And I don't believe NAFTA was necessarily rubber stamped based upon the difficulty we had with it. It was not. It was very difficult.
Thank you.
I'll take a couple more.
Okay, one more. You've been very patient.
Joan. We'll take another one over here, too.
Okay. I'm going to take the liberty of saying hello to my ex-boss, and I'm glad to see you here. and I can toot your horn when you can't toot it. One thing I want to say to you is and to all of you, because a lot of good things don't get reported in the media, is when Secretary Daley came to the Commerce Department, we had a lot of trade missions, and we had a lot of different departments doing trade missions. And the first thing that he did was to institutionalize standard operating procedures for all of the trade missions, which meet a high scrutiny and very transparent, which included the Minority Business Development Agency, which was the first time in history that a secretary included the Minority Business Development Agency. And that is important, as he mentioned in his comments, that developing countries, we cannot forget them. And since I've been at the Kennedy School, and I want to share with you, Secretary, I've gotten several letters from those minority businesses that we took that would have never had the opportunity to go on a trade mission to a developing country, who have gotten businesses, who have come back and are able to expand and hire people here in the United States. And in fact, in Pittsburgh, there's an environmental minority firm who got back, was able to hire more employees off of the welfare rolls, and now he has a free office space from the mayor of Pittsburgh because of that initiative. And it would have never happened but for the Commerce Department and but for your initiative, and I thank you.
Thanks, John.
And
I
we
appreciate
also
it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking one more. My name's Harry Foster. I'm a mid-career here. Given the results of the Kodak Fuji case in the WTO, on reflection, does the administration think that, given the merits of the case, that was a bad strategy? And has that degraded support for the WTO in the Congress, in your view?
Well, I don't think it's seriously degraded support for the WTO, to be honest with you. I think there was a lot of disappointment because it's been, in our opinion, pretty clear that the Japanese market has not been open. The photographic paper market has not been open at all. And it's not just to the American firms, to other firms from around the world. Ambassador Barshevsky and I, the trade representative, announced last week a joint program where we're going to monitor the representations which were made by the Japanese in their filings in that case, when they made representations that their market is open and they've done all these things. We're basically going to do a 6-month review and look at whether or not they've lived up to their representations and whether they were honest and true, and then decide at what point, if any, that we take action. So I would think it hasn't seriously eroded support for the WTO, but it has not been a helpful situation. But I think if we stay aggressive, Trade Rep's office and we, in trying to address some of the representations which they made in their filings, that may be a way to re-engage the Congress in being supportive of the WTO. And it's been one of the few, if only major case that we've lost before them.
Thank you. Okay, please join in thanking Secretary Daley for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Very good. We'll welcome you back anytime.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pretty good. Oh, that was good. I like